this was one of the most impressive experiences I've ever had in my life. Uh, I looked up into the sky. I saw this enormous ball of orange flaming fire in the sky, like was it the Eye of Sauron or something? Was staring at me. I felt this just like a collapse happen in my body. Like my whole worldview was just completely shaken. Um, at that stage, I was working from the sorts of things you would see, in a just everyday sort of, things on TV, like the lightning bolt. I thought, oh, some sort of weird ghost entity or something trying to possess me. And this big orange plasma ball, I thought it was a UFO. I don't know what the hell this thing was. But strangely enough, when I was thinking about it in my head, it would kind of move the way that. So if I said, I want you to move right, it moved right. If I said, I want you to blink on and off, it would do that as well. And this thing was massive. I've talked to people before. It's, was it Venus scintillating, or maybe it was a flare, or so. It was none of these things. It was way too big. The light was contained within the sphere, and there was some kind of connection there.
Welcome back, everybody, to Joshua's Magic, a channel about the intersection of the spiritual and the ordinary. Today, I'm talking with Brendon, who had a very interesting spiritual experience. And there's really some depth and meaning, it seems, to it. So he's going to tell us a bit about that. But Brendon is a doctor of organic chemistry. He holds a master's of education, has a graduate degree in psychology. So welcome to the channel, Brendon. It's good to have you on.
Thanks, Josh. It's a real pleasure to be here. I really enjoy the work that you've been doing. In particular, I like the live streams that you do, just interpreting the Alice Bailey works. Something that I find very difficult to do myself when I'm reading those books from time to time, or snippets from them. So having that sort of interpretive, someone interpreting things the way that you do, I've found that really useful.
Well, thanks. I appreciate the compliment. And it's good to know that somebody's really getting value out of it too.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you have an interest in the Alice Bailey works, but you had this experience, and I guess why don't you start with some of the background of what led into that?
Sure. So I now recognize that I've had two very distinct experiences. One that lasted about a week, and then one that lasted about 9 months. But it was the 9 month experience that significantly shifted my perspective, or my ontology, as people would say. Interestingly, they all happened in years that are divisible by 7, which I think spiritual people will find quite interesting. I think I might focus on the one that lasted for 9 months, and then when we talk a little bit about when I started to maybe understand a little bit about what was actually happening in a theosophical context, I might explain what happened when I was 35. But I could just go back to the start, really, of how things started happening for me. But I think I should put some caveats around the way that I think about things, because we're going to talk about some experiences that are very difficult to find good language to describe. And so it's really important that people understand that when I'm talking about these experiences, that I do understand that there's a very heavy symbolic element to those experiences and the meanings that those experiences have, as opposed to looking at them from an extremely literal lens. So that's one point. And the other point I think is important to make is one of the reasons for me wanting to do this is that I think that the second experience that I had that was extremely difficult to go through went much longer than it probably needed to, because it was very hard to find. I found it very hard to find useful information about these sorts of experiences. And so it's my hope that in having this conversation, in having provided you with the credentials that I've got, that gives people a picture perhaps of the sort of viewpoint I might have had on reality before the experiences started to occur. If someone comes across this interview, it'll be useful to them in normalizing the experiences for them and
Yeah, I think
helping them
that's
to
the
get
main
through it.
reason to have you on, is that it might connect with somebody. Somebody might really get something out of it, and you might speak to something that's going on with them, or has gone on with them, or might go on with them in the future. So
Yeah.
yeah, but please continue.
So, so the so the first thing that started to happen to me, it started happening. It was just before I was turning 42. And I started having extremely lucid dreams. This sort of thing hadn't happened before in my life, and it was actually very pleasant. I could wake up in the middle of the night, go and do something, go back to bed, think about that dream, lock straight in, go straight back into it. I was having dreams while I was in the dream, completely lucid, could remember that I'd had the dream many times before. When I woke up, I remembered it, and I remembered that I'd had the dream multiple times before. And it was, things like I'd be in a house that I knew I'd been in previous dreams. But because I was lucid and able to control the dream, doors to rooms that I knew from my memory of the previous dreams I was unable to get into, I was able to unlock them and go into those rooms. There's nothing spectacular that was there, but I was able to do these sorts of things. So it was really, at the start, it was just kind of fun. And I remember talking to family members and saying, "Oh, I'm having all these really lucid dreams at the moment. Like, just I remember everything from it, and I can do whatever I want in it." I don't know why on earth this is happening, but it's great. Ordinarily I'd wake up in the night to, I'm hungry, I'll need to use the bathroom or something like that, and it might take me a few hours even to get back to sleep. I just go back to bed and I can just think about the dream, and boom, I'm off to sleep again, and I'm in the same dream, and I'm exploring this same world again in the dream.
That must have been a lot of fun.
It was great. Yeah, I love
I
it,
had
and
some
it
very limited
happens.
experiences with lucid dreaming, but what you're describing, that must have been something.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it started off as a really fun experience. Certainly didn't stay that way, but it definitely started off as a really fun experience. So that's where it all kind of started, and then I started to have experiences that were eventually happening in my conscious awake state. So I'll try and describe one of the initial experiences that occurred, where I saw at the door to my room this sort of it looked like frankly, it looked like a lightning bolt. It was sort of a symbolic thing at the door, and it flew over the top of me, and I heard in my head, "Where's your sister?" in this sort of really quite threatening tone. And I was paralyzed, half paralyzed down one side of my body, the other side could move. So I'm lying in bed and I'm thinking, "Oh, I've had a stroke." um, I don't know what on earth just happened to me. I could roll myself around with one half of my body, but I couldn't with the other. And then I thought, well, I don't know, maybe I'm just going to hope it's a sleep thing. I did see something beforehand. I've been having all these weird dreams. I'm going to go back to sleep, but I'll see what happens when I wake up. and I woke up, I was fine. Trouble was that happened on a few mornings. It happened kind of repeatedly, not disabling my body, but some encounter with, as I would wake up, I would see this lightning bolt thing at my door, and that would fly over me, have some sort of interaction with me. So at
Was
this
it like
stage for me,
like Zeus's lightning, sort of like that? Like it wasn't like a person, right?
no, it was black, like
Huh.
this kind of thing, and it had dots around it.
Huh.
It turns out that's actually an Indigenous Australian spirit, because eventually, further down in my story, I did meet with an Indigenous elder that's from a local group, and he knew exactly what it was. He even was able to give it a name, and I hadn't even finished my drawing, and he was able to tell me what the rest of the drawing was going to look like. So that's when things started to get really um, quite scary for me, um, because it was happening regularly, and there would also be a huge bang noise after the experience. Now my wife, she has a sort of interest in spiritual things. I'd had no interest in spiritual things at all, to that stage of my life. I had stuffed around, like, you go to a fair or something and there's someone reading palms. Oh yeah, I'll go over and just see if they're any good or that kind of thing. But that's about the total extent of it. Any UFO stuff on TV, all of that kind of stuff, just not interested. Um, but I thought, this is really disturbing me. I really don't know what to do about it. I'm not enjoying waking up in the morning like this. So I actually went and I saw a medium, to try and find out what was going on. She didn't really know what was going on, and I'm not sure that the person she then referred me to necessarily knew what was happening. Uh, but the long and the short of it is, after talking a couple of times with some mediums and I tried all these different things that people talk about, because I just couldn't get this thing to stop. I tried the sage, and I tried certain prayers and things like that. Nothing would stop this from occurring. And so this um, medium, who was I think she was a minister in a spiritualist church. Have you heard of that? Well, she said
Um,
she
yeah, spiritualism I've heard of, like the 1800s. I haven't heard of much modern stuff today. Do they like hold seances or?
Yeah, I think they do stuff like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Anyway, uh, she said that, oh, we've got to do a clearing of your house, and I'm just thinking, well, I've studied a bit of psychology, I've studied Jung and things like that. Presumably, I'm having some kind of, my subconscious is somehow manifesting into my conscious mind these things, and I've just got to go through the process. Like my my psyche just wants me to go through this process for whatever reason. Like, I'm not going to really question it. Um, I'm just going to go through it, and hopefully it'll just settle my psyche down, and then I'll be home and hosed. I'll be fine. But what happened when she came to the house? Um, that kind of took things to a whole other level for me, uh, because the experience wasn't me then sort of, I'd just woken up from sleep or something like that. So in that liminal space, it wasn't that anymore. What happened when the medium came over to clear the house? I was in full consciousness. My wife was there as well. Um, and I saw the things that she said were in the house. I'll describe a couple of them for you if you'd like. Um, so she came over and she had all the, the gear, the sort of spiritualist gear, I suppose, sage and things like that. She said, we're going to walk around the house. We're going to burn this sage, and we're going to say the Lord's Prayer as we walk around the house. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna go with it. She said, oh, there's this it's like a master or enlightened being or something is turned up in the corner of the room. It's here to help with the clearing of the house. I'm like, okay, all right. So I walk over to the corner of the room and I see this golden circle. And in the golden circle is a face, like this really wise old face, all in golden light, sitting in the corner of the room. And me being a scientist, I laugh about it now, but I just couldn't accept it at face value. So I walked away, came back to have another look. Yep, still there. Walked away, came back, had another look, still there. Okay. So this actually it's kind of funny because the medium, she said at the start, oh, I think we'll make a good team because you're very visual. You tend to see things, you seem to see things very visually. She somehow could tell what things were, but she isn't able to actually see them. I'm not sure how she works, but so we went up
Yeah,
the
you
this
can sense entities present but not see them at times, or you can feel certain energies but not see. I mean, like I don't see stuff ever, but I can sense, that something's going on, or there might be a spirit there sometimes.
but she could also describe what it would look like visually, even though she couldn't see it.
Interesting.
Which fascinates me. I don't know how she was able to do that.
Well, she probably had
So,
some image of it in her mind's eye, but not, with her physical or etheric side, I would imagine.
right, okay, yeah. So that's probably true. And then so we're saying the prayer and we're walking around, and you know, she does some things in different areas where I think she thinks there's some negative energy there, or I don't know. I'm not picking anything up. And then we start to walk up the stairs, and I had seen like distortions on the stairwell um, prior to this. Like you'd see like a sort of out of just out of your straight on vision, like a sort of a blob or distortion. I don't know how you would really describe it in space. Just sort of in that area. I knew there was something going on where the stairs were.
Was it
So
maybe
we
sort
walked
of
up.
like heat waves, when the pavement gets really hot,
No,
and no, it's not like that.
no, definitely not. No, definitely not. Uh, so we walk up to the stairs, and she says, "Well, there's some entities are here, um, and they seem to be connected to you around your solar plexus. Um, do you want them to go?" Now, this is probably a point where I need to backtrack a little bit to the meeting that I had with her the previous week to talk about what was happening. And for some reason, she kept saying, "Oh, the you're not just experiencing spirits," but she seemed to think they were aliens or something like this. That's what she said. Okay, I'm not saying I know what these things are. I'm just going to tell you the phenomenology and what people said. Okay, and I'll let you interpret things as you want. But she said they were aliens. So I'm driving home from that meeting with her, and I'm thinking, as I said before, my Jungian kind of hat on. Okay, well, I'm just going to go with it. My psyche, I'm thinking, well, that was true. How would I want that to be treated? I'd want to approach that sort of thing with a really positive, loving attitude. And during this, so I had this my head was very clear, is the best I can describe it. It's extremely clear, and I was able to think with the sort of intensity that it's hard for me to think with now that the experiences are over. we could probably touch on it later, but I suspect it's got something to do with, in the theosophical writings, they talk about when you're going through initiation, and I do consider this was initiation, that there's certain energies are being guided by a master towards you. Somehow, I think there were certain energies being pushed that way, because now they've been withdrawn somewhat. I can't think with the same sort of clarity. But when I got home, having taken that approach and that sort of mentality, I saw a ball of black come out of my mouth and float away. And I took my dogs outside. When I took my dogs outside, this was one of the most impressive experiences I've ever had in my life. I looked up into the sky.
Before we get there, what was the
Yeah,
mentality that preceded that black thing coming out of your mouth?
I just adopted this like unconditional love kind of perspective towards whatever these entities were.
Oh, okay.
Right? I just thought, well, I'm just going to be very positive about it. I'm not going to be aggressive, like get the hell out of my house kind of thing. But if that's true, and I'm just going to run with it. And the choice I made was that I was going to be very positive about it. And so then when I went outside, I saw this enormous ball of orange flaming fire in the sky, like was it the Eye of Sauron or something? Was staring at me. I still to this day don't know what it is, or what it was, but I felt this just like a collapse happen in my body, like my whole worldview was just completely shaken. At that stage, I was working from the sorts of things you would see, in a just everyday sort of, things on TV, like the lightning bolt. I thought, oh, some sort of weird ghost entity or something trying to possess me. And this big orange plasma ball, I thought it was a UFO. I don't know what the hell this thing was. But strangely enough, when I was thinking about it in my head, it would kind of move the way that. So if I said I want you to move right, it moved right. If I said I want you to blink on and off, it would do that as well. And this thing was massive. I've talked to people before. It's, was it Venus scintillating, or maybe it was a flare, or it was none of these things. It was way too big. The light was contained within the sphere, and there was some kind of connection there. I don't know how best to describe it. Yeah, so I literally felt I basically felt my worldview just collapse. It was just I don't know how else to describe it. I felt it internally, shift in my body, because I knew, like, there was just an undeniable experience. Like everything prior to that, even though I was acting upon it and going through the motions, I'll go see a medium. These sorts of, it was very easy to maintain a level of sort of, you're battling a number of things when you go through these processes. One of those is like you're denying the experiences, even though you're still having them. You're experiencing fear around the experiences. You're trying to make sense of them, and you're also trying to still function like a normal human being in the world. And so, when you have things that are, so it was really stepped up, right? So, my first experiences were lucid dreams. Okay, people can handle that, right? You're just having some kind of interesting dreams. Oh, and then you're having something happen in that space where your consciousness is coming from, in theosophical terms, from that astral plane back into the physical plane, in that liminal space. Okay, I can kind of handle that. But then when you're having an experience in full waking consciousness stood in your backyard, that pillar, that fourth pillar, that deniability pillar, it just collapses. And you have to go, oh, okay, I need to reevaluate where I am, what I am, everything that's going on. It just hits you with well, it hit me anyway with an intense sort of force.
And you were saying, we touched on this briefly, I think, but you were saying before in a previous conversation we had that you had a very kind of atheistic scientific worldview that sort of precluded all this stuff. Is that
Absolutely.
correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was a big fan of the Four Horsemen, you know, that sort of that group, the Christopher Hitchens group, and that
Oh,
kind
the
of
new
thing.
atheist
Yeah,
thing.
the new
Yeah.
atheist. Yeah, I'd read Christopher Hitchens' book and you know, Daniel Dennett and all that sort of thing, and I was very much like anything that had happened to me that was, you know, woo, so to speak, was some kind of like part of my imagination, or I don't know. I'd find some way to explain it away. And Jungian psychology is actually really good in helping you to explain those things away if you have a really scientific mind, because it gives you, you know, you can say, oh, it's some sort of archetype that I'm for some reason becoming conscious of, or something like that. But it's not real. It's just part of, you know, part of what's in that mess of the way your mind interprets the world, or something like that, and something odd happened. So, but I think there's a couple more things that I probably should talk about that helped with reorienting me, um, and then what kind of happened at the end, and then maybe if we wanted to talk a little bit, or you know, ask any questions.
Sure,
So
yeah,
the next
continue on
day,
with where you think.
sure. So the next day, and remembering at this stage, you know, I'm thinking it's all about ghosts and UFOs and all this kind of stuff. The next day, when I wake up in the morning, there's a distortion at the end of my bed, at my feet, and I've heard other people describe this experience. They usually call it Kundalini Awakening. I've heard Gary Nolan describe something not dissimilar. I've heard Jeffrey Kripal describe this kind of experience happening to him. Um, but I'll talk about what it was for me. So there was, to me, like a disturbance in you know, in the field, in space at my feet, and it started moving up my body, like being in a really dense, clear fire, and every atom of your being is vibrating, and you're hearing a really high pitched noise, as if, you know, as it comes up your body. So it start at my feet and come right up my body. Um, the the sensation of the density of it is like if you've ever gone scuba diving, or snorkeling, and you just dive down under the water, and that feeling of intense pressure, that that was the feeling that I had. And I had a number of visions, and I was spoken to while I was in that state within some kind of, I'm not exactly sure what it was. I've been told that it was chi, by someone who, you know, tends to know a lot about this sort of stuff. Um, but the first vision that I had, while that was occurring, was like a split screen, and my face. So like you're looking at it like here, and one side was me looking kind of, you know, confused and things like that, and the other side was this sort of really like white, clear white skinned entity, is the best I could describe it. It's not a grey, nothing, none of that sort of stuff. Eyes like a human being, sort of a knot of hair on the top of its head, um, and a look of serenity on its face. And I was told, you're consciously connected. What the hell does that mean? I, yeah, is what I'm thinking at that time while I'm in a state of basically terror of what's happening to me. And then I was told, you're going to be a coach for your daughter. that was very explicitly told to me. I was then told something that's quite cryptic, so I won't go
Can
into
I
it
ask
because
how
it's
old was your daughter at this time?
7.
7. Okay. And then you were told something cryptic?
Yeah. Told something cryptic where I was told to work with, and I was to work with, so I'm looking down on on a house with rooms with like, there's like people. I know that there are people there that other people can't see, and I'm supposed to work with them. That's one thing I was told. And then the next things I was told were sort of like confirmations. So things that I would be able to confirm in the real world ultimately. So like I was told about, so when I actually related this story to my wife in the morning, I knew that she'd had trouble with a torch that night because um, I was told about something
The
that my
like what we call
father
a
in,
flashlight here?
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
okay.
right. Yeah, that
Because
she
when
had been able to
in
turn one
America,
on.
when you say torch, you usually think of a stick with
Oh,
fire on
okay.
the end. So
Yeah,
just want
no,
to clear that
flashlight.
up. Okay.
So I was told that, and I was told something about my father-in-law as well that I otherwise wouldn't have known, and I was shown it as well. So I was able um to clarify those things to just to add more reality, I suppose, so that I wouldn't be able to dismiss it. And as the energy left, so it was not just like it went from out of the top of my head, but also out of here from my chest. And as it came out from my chest, it left me with the most intense feeling of love that I've ever experienced in my life. Like I just felt totally blissed out is the best I can describe it. And it felt sticky as it left. It was like it just sort of pulled out, and as it pulled out, it's like it injected some intense feeling of love and um, everything that you could imagine associated with that. And I just lay there, just having had that experience. Like, what? It just felt amazing. It felt so good. When I went down to talk to my wife and explain what I'd experienced, I'm actually a very, how do you say? All my muscles are very tight. I don't do yoga not that hatha yoga sort of yoga. But I was sat with my foot tucked right underneath me, like like a yoga, like in a yoga pose. I just felt so relaxed, and um, I didn't even know I was doing it. That I was sat that way, and while I'm telling my wife this story, and then I realized, how am I sitting like this? This is just bizarre. I can't do it now, but um, after that experience, I could, and that happened for another 3 mornings. It happened like that. It's spot on at 5 a.m. is when it happened. Um, and things were just starting to get too distressing for me. Um, and I said that out loud. After the third time it happened, I was downstairs and I just said, look, I just can't handle this. I've got to work. I've got a family. You know, I can't sleep because I'm expecting this thing something to happen to me. It's too intense. It didn't happen again. I had a lot of other experiences with energy, like literal feeling of energy and so on, but it was much less intense, and it allowed me just to sort of just lie there and just enjoy it rather than the intensity of those initial experiences, which were relatively quick when they occurred. So that really was that was really the height of, well, it wasn't really I don't know whether to say it's a height of things, but that's when everything had really stepped up, right? So you've gone from dreams to liminal space to like completely conscious, wild experiences. And they sort of continue to happen. Another thing that was really bizarre that was happening was I started like investigating the sky. This was actually a really important experience because it helped me to reorient in a way how I was interpreting what was happening. So I started, because I thought there was UFOs involved and things like that. I don't know, maybe there are, who knows? But I started investigating the sky, and I was using, like the night sky app and compasses and things like that to try and find celestial objects. And there was this one really bright thing in the sky that I could not identify. For like 5 nights running, I couldn't identify what this thing was. It should have been Venus, but 3 of my compasses were not pointing in the right direction to where Venus was. So I couldn't work out what the hell this thing was. And I said to my wife, I'm sick of this. I'm going to go and I'm going to sit on the balcony. I'm going to watch the sun go down, and I'm going to see if that thing is there as the sun goes down and whether it just stays there or not. And so I'm sat in my chair on the balcony, sun goes down, and the stars start coming out, and that bright thing comes out, just like any other star. I'm looking at all my compasses, and they're still not pointing to anything that it should be. So I go down, but I think to myself, no, it's got to be Venus. It has to be. It can't be anything else. So I go downstairs to talk to my wife and tell her what I've seen, just as I'm reporting these experiences. I'm stood outside, on the in the sort of patio area, and as I say to her, it's got to be Venus. I don't know what's going on with my compasses. They all moved, and they all aligned and pointed so that and showed that it was Venus. So for five nights, I tried to identify this thing, and then when I eventually was like really determined and had sat on the out on the balcony to try and work out what this thing was, and I go and tell my wife, my compasses shift. And so getting back to what I put as a caveat right at the start of this discussion, was that I interpret all of these things as being symbolic. Even if I don't know how to interpret them, I'm sure that there's symbolic meaning to them. And what that experience meant to me was, you're looking in the wrong place. You're looking for answers in the external world with your compasses and all of this kind of stuff, and going around and clearing the house and all of these kinds of things. But the answers aren't there. We can stuff around with your external experience. That's that's, to use a theosophical kind of language, that's the world of form. That's not where you find meaning. You find meaning internally. You find meaning inside yourself. Even you can have 3 compasses that are telling you the wrong thing, and you won't be able to find any answers that way. So that was a really critical experience for me.
Yeah, that's something. And I think you're getting at some of the use in considering this, because it's not just, oh, interesting, flashy phenomenon. Like it really
Mm,
brought some development of your consciousness and a realignment of things.
yeah, 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 absolutely. Um, but I didn't really know how to quite crystallize that thought, because after I'd had the experiences that I just sort of explained to you, I continued to have disturbing experiences, but at night and during the day, I'd see gold light and things like that around me and so on. I still do sometimes. In fact, I was playing with gold light in my mind last night. Um, but I didn't know how best to really understand what was going on. I tried, there was one kind of organization. I won't say who they were, but I joined a particular sort of spiritual related organization, but they're very focused within the form aspect of things. And I would eventually find out that I would be told explicitly that that was a mistake to have joined that group. that had delayed my development somewhat. Well, not in a nasty way, just in a very matter-of-fact way.
You had a spiritual impression that that was the case? Is that what you mean you were told that?
No, no. So it's quite literal. Again, I would see a sort of distorted field appear in front of me, and it's kind of almost like you get sucked into it somehow. I don't know how else to describe it. And then you might be looking at an image, and there's someone talking to you about what you're seeing.
Okay, but
And
it was from a spiritual source. It wasn't from like
yeah,
some
it wasn't not
person.
a not a
Okay.
spiritual impression or my perspective. I was told
Yeah.
explicitly
Okay.
that I shouldn't have done that. Um, and then I asked about. Actually asked about someone who's involved in quite deeply in theosophy, and um, I was shown the symbology that I needed to see that meant yes, that's the right place to be looking.
Can you, I think it would be interesting, the symbology. Can you unpack that, or is it too personal?
Sure. So when you get these messages, or at least when I get these messages, you sort of you see and you know it's very what's the term? Synesthetic in its experience. Um, so everything kind of happens at once. And so I saw the conversation I'd been having with this person online, and it changed into the underlying programming code. And that came with the understanding that that conversation was legitimately about, or at least I was being told that was a conversation about real things, reality, not, you know, not glamour and mire and stuff, or, there's always going to be some of that, um, but that's the place to be. That's the place to be looking. Uh, that was a very important experience. So I wound up ultimately. I joined the Experiencer group, which is it's run by this guy called J. Christopher King. He's very well known in the sort of UFO field, and I was talking to various people on there. This is about 6 months after. This stage, I'm sleeping with the light on every night. I'm just terrified because I'm looking into everything I can spiritually, but I can't really find any answers. What the hell is going on? And someone that I
And
was,
these, spiritual guides or whoever, was seemingly
mm,
communicating to you at certain times, they didn't have any specific answers other than, um, to seek out that one thing.
they just pushed me in the right directions,
Mhm.
um, and that's about it. Um, it- some of it's hard for me to explain, so I'm skipping over a lot of stuff because I don't have the language to really describe it. Um, like having pulses of what seemed to me like electricity, like balls of electricity, is how I interpreted them. I didn't see them, but I was aware of them because I was having experiences where I was having awareness outside of my body. Um, and they would come, and there would be some kind of message there. Like if I was one time I was really, really upset with myself over something that I'd done, just absolutely distraught. And one of these things came, and it was just next to my ear here, and I listened into it. It was like listening into an abyss. And my own voice came back, sort of, oh, you poor you, this kind of, you think you're better than everybody else. These sorts of messages. And I sat there thinking, oh, what's that about? And I came to realize, oh, I understand. If I'm holding myself to a higher standard than I hold everybody else to, that means I think of myself as better than them. Like I'm just a human being like everybody else. And if I would forgive someone else that that trespass, so to speak, then I should be forgiving myself. Um, it's actually really egotistical and narcissistic to think in the way that I was thinking, that was making me so upset, rather than just accepting okay, you're going to stuff up sometimes, and everybody else does too, and that's okay. That's fine. So I was getting messages like that because
I think
if
you
a
explained that in an intelligible way. I think it was clear.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm sure there's nuances to it that you can't quite put into words, but yeah, don't shy away from any of that stuff, even if you maybe don't think you have the perfect words, because some of that might really connect
Mhm.
with people.
Yeah, yeah. So the one of the reasons why I connect this to initiation in theosophy is because I was dealing a lot with fear, and I was dealing a lot with attachments and astral issues. So it was about moving my consciousness from being in a astrally polarized state to a more mentally polarized state. And it seemed to me that fit within the context of what I've heard people in lectures and so on describe uh, initiation to be like, at least a second initiation. Um, but anyway, to sort of get back to a little bit of how I was ultimately coming to understand what was happening was someone said to me on the experiencer group, that they'd been told to tell me to read this book by Mathew Roberts called Initiated. And I don't know whether you're familiar with Mathew Roberts. Um, he's quite well known in that kind of UFO space. He's been on Netflix shows and things like that. And he's written this book called Initiated. He was on the USS Roosevelt, which is the one I think that they saw the gimbal, that gimbal thing, that UFO one, that one, that
I'm not
you know what I'm
sure
talking
about
about?
this. At least it's not driving
Okay,
me.
okay. So they saw the gimbal footage. If you look up gimbal footage,
Okay.
it'll come up.
All right.
Um, it's yeah, it's really well known. Anyway, after he'd had that experience, and then he worked in the ONI, he went through this wild kind of experience with entities and all sorts of kinds of things. And he wrote a book about it. He connected it through history, back into like Greek mythology and the Eleusinian mysteries, um, and to Jungian psychology through the work of someone called Robert Moore. And I eventually, I reached out to him. He's a really friendly guy. He'll help anybody that's going through this sort of thing. He's got time for everyone. He's a top bloke. Um, and took I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks for me to get his book. Because no one will publish his book. He's had to be self-published, which is just wild. Um, and when I got it, I devoured the book just so quickly because it was joining so many dots for me, um, together in terms of like what was happening and how to best deal with it, right? How to approach it. It was great that it situated the experience within a historical lens because it felt like, oh, okay, this is actually not something unknown. It's not something that's just happening to me and I'm, having this wild ride for some reason, some crazy psychotic break. But it's actually a very common thing, or I don't know how common it is in terms of percentage of the population, but it's certainly a well-known phenomena within certain circles that goes way back in history.
How
And there is a way to understand it.
what additional context or light did he add to it that
Sure. Sure. So um, it was the way that it explained. I think there's a couple of different things in that book, but one thing that really hit home, even though I mentioned to you about, the compasses and coming to realize that I needed to be looking to internal development. And as I did develop internally with experiences, they would shift and change over time. Um, I didn't really understand how to fully grasp that. And in his book, he talks about Jung's actual definitions for introverts and extroverts, or introversion and extroversion. So extroversion is when you have a sort of a perspective on things that you are kind of projecting outside of yourself. It's not about going to parties and that sort of stuff. It's not the way that people use it colloquially. And introversion is about taking an experience and trying to make internal meaning with it. So it's kind of like if you meet somebody and you don't get along, an extrovert will say, well, that person made me angry. That person made me mad. So you're interpreting the world and your experiences in terms of the things that are outside of you, as opposed to an introvert who might go, okay, what was it about how, what is it about my psyche and my personality that meant that that was an unpleasant interaction, or that I interpreted that interaction in an unpleasant way? And how can I change the way that I think about things so that when I have an interaction like that, again, that won't occur for me? So you can actually, if you take that framework, it's very useful in trying to develop a really well integrated personality, or as well an integrated personality as I think you can get, because you're constantly looking for internal, inner psychological triggers for experiences, as opposed to putting the blame on everything out there, outside of yourself, which you have no control over, for the most part. But you do have control over your inner experience and how you interpret things and how you want your sense of being and feeling to be. And so when you're having a anomalous experience, it's kind of showing you, this is how I read it anyway. It's showing you ways that you might be extroverting aspects of your psyche in the world. That it's almost like a karmic comeuppance in a way. The things that are visited upon you are the things that you have pushed out into the world. And so by internalizing the sort of the message and reflecting on the experience and trying to look for the symbolic meaning underneath it, it allows you to shift your perspective. And then your experience with anomalous things will also shift, rather than being stuck in one place for a really long time, which I think can happen. Like I was saying to you before about this sort of those four pillars. And if you get stuck, like it would have been very easy for me, I think, to have gone, look, this is all too much for me. I've seen that huge big red ball of flame in the sky. I don't mean this as a generalization for everybody, but it will apply for some people. And then gone, okay, now I'm going to become a UFO researcher, and I'm going to go on Twitter. I'm going to tell people that there's a UFO base under the hill across the road from me, or so there must be something like that, and it's all aliens, and it's all outside of myself. And even in that experience, right, I said that I felt like I was connected. So there must have been some interiority that experience was relevant to, right? Because I was able to be thinking, oh, if you move to the right, and it moved right. It was trying to communicate something to me symbolically, but I wasn't in the space yet to really understand it. But Mathew Roberts' book really lays that out with lots of different examples quite clearly, and also situates it within a historical context. And so I found that extremely useful. It's particularly the part where he writes about, he got to the point where there was that much happening. Like there was, every night he was having some kind of wild, entities in his room. I mean, I'd wake up and I'd find like shadow people stood around me with their hands moving over an energy center or something, and
Did you sense
I'd
they were
say, oh, he's
negative
waking up,
entities, or were they somehow
and
not negative?
I didn't feel like it was a negative thing,
Mhm.
but at the same time, it's a kind of a terrifying thing to
Yeah.
experience. It's like you're living in a horror movie. And then they shot off through there was like a black portal opened up, and they were, off out of it. Um, I had an experience where I was, um, filled with this impulse, this desire or impulse to go outside and weed my garden. And so I went out there and just started smashing weeds up everywhere with a kind of reckless joy or something like that. After that, I started experiencing this, like, I'd see it in the hallway. It'd be like a little black ball, and then it'd expand into a face, like a sort of a garden gnome kind of thing or something. And it would hit me in the face. But when it hit me in the face, because it's now I know it was probably made of a more subtle substance, it would just sort of puff out. That message there. What do you think? What do you think? Go and clean the weeds from your garden means? Like your garden is a form, right? It's something that you grow for beauty or for food or things like that. And allowing weeds to grow in it is representative of, of like not having a clear mind, a clear psyche. It's like when people talk about this kind of thing all the time, but they don't realize it extends as far as it does. Like people will say, oh, if you've got a messy desk, you've got a messy mind. And everyone accepts that. But this sort of experience was really like hammering that home in a sort of a Gnostic way, I suppose. There was gnosis of that. And, in his book, he talks about, I think I'm trying to, I hope I get this right. There's a hymn to Demeter or something to do with, or what is it, the one to do with Persephone? But it talks about,
I believe Demeter was Persephone's mother.
okay, so it talks about one of those gods taking a child and burning it in a flame at night to try and make that baby immortal. And that's a symbolic story that I relate to the experience I talked to you about earlier, where I felt like I was in a clear flame, vibrating, with all my atoms vibrating. Because part of this whole experience is that you do come to realize that you are in a way immortal. Like you are, like reincarnation becomes something that you have no doubt is a real thing. And you start to think in terms of, at least I do. I'm now thinking about myself in terms of, you know, the experience of initiation in an elongated way. Like when I was 35, I had an experience where it was like my brain cracked. I said to my wife, as I came across this guy who works for the UN and he worked for oh gosh, the World Health Organization, and he was really amazing negotiator. And he came into the workplace that I was at the time. And he started saying all this crazy stuff. I couldn't understand why people were staying in the room about consciousness and things like this. And I had this epiphany that's also related to what I was just talking about in terms of exterior, like extroversion and introversion. And I realized, oh, because there was someone who'd come into the meeting, I was really enjoying this by talking about all this wild stuff about consciousness. And someone came in who just couldn't handle what he was saying. And he was really blowing up the seminar. And I started feeling sick in my stomach. And then he left. And I said to this guy afterwards, what is it? Why do I feel sick to my stomach by this guy? And he said, do you think he came in here to make you feel sick to your stomach? And I just had this whoa realization. Hold on, I've done that to myself. That's not something like he didn't make me feel sick to my stomach. I've done that. That's got to do with my attachments and my projections onto him. And it kind of it just sort of, that again was like an epiphany that really tumbled for me in a lot of different areas. It'd take too long to kind of go through it, but I spent a whole week where I felt connected to everything and everybody around me. And I didn't know what on earth had happened. I didn't feel any anxiety for a whole week, any stress. I was incredibly functional. I experienced like weird spontaneous laughter, laughing fits for some reason. I don't know why. And then after a week, it was gone. Um, and it does, I have to say, it does remind me of when I listen to people talking about the first initiation and experiencing like a glimpse of the Buddhic plane. You know, I was like sat out on a park bench in the rain, feeling like I could see other colors and all this kind of stuff. It was really wild just for 1 week. And then it was gone. And that was when I was 35, 7 years before the experience I'm talking to you about now. So, so his book was really important because it it helped to orient even more my experiences internally. It helped me not feel like I was a crazy person because he was able to connect it to all of the history and so on. He gave me the tools of understanding introversion and extroversion. And then there's a really important part of his book where he talks about how he got to the point where he had to decide either I'm going to continue to be afraid or I'm just going to get rid of fear altogether. Like I can't live like this anymore. And he decided to get rid of fear. That's what he was going to do. Um, and that's what I had to do as well. I had to go, okay, stuff this. Uh, I would have experiences at night where it was like I was being hit by a thunderbolt in the nighttime. Or like one time I saw a blue entity start to sort of appear above me. And then I got terrified and then it sort of disappeared. But after I read that, the next time that happened, I just got up, lights off, and I walk into the hallway and just bring it on. Like everything, I was just after that, I was just bring it on. I do not care anymore. You can throw everything you want at me, send shadow people, send bloody UFOs, whatever it happens to be. I don't care anymore. And once I got to that point, then that's a real seminal point in the experience. And it becomes part of your life and you know, your your ability to function in the world after that. Like even quite literally, like you know, I'm a teacher now, and I take kids on camp, and they always do things like, oh, you got to go on a huge swing, or you've got to climb this enormous pole and stand on the top of it and jump and grab a ring or something like that. And I'll just connect with that feeling of removing fear and do the activity and come down. And you know, stood on a 30-meter pole at the top of it or something like that and jump and grab a ring and come down. And the people facilitating it were like, oh, you know, how was that for you? Did you overcome some fears or things like that? And I was like, just no. You're able to just when you've experienced those sorts of things that I'd experienced, um, it's not the fear's completely gone, but you have a you're not as beholden to it as you were before. It's not influencing your decisions as much as it ever
Yeah,
was
like they
before.
say, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's
Mm.
having the fear there and then acting despite it.
Yeah, yeah. Being able to recognize it and being able to control your interiority. Because at the end of the day, I really think that these experiences are about trying to move you from a place where you're, because if you're experiencing the world all the time through emotional states and so on that are external to you have very little free will. And I think you have very little consciousness in many ways. And I think a lot of people live their lives that way, just bouncing from one thing to the other. Um, you know, this person makes me happy. This person makes me sad. I'm going to go and hang out with a person that makes me happy because I prefer to be polarized in that direction as opposed to polarized to being sad. Some people are polar, like actually seek out people that will make them feel sad, and they'll just bounce around like having partners and so on that, you know, make them feel miserable and things for whatever reason because they're in that sort of space. Or and so they live their life through identifying with their emotional states, with the astral plane, to use a sort of a theosophical way of looking at it. But if you can learn to be able to recognize your emotional states and to be able to regulate them better, that provides you with the opportunity to make better decisions, better to enact your will in the world in a way that's far more informed and deliberative. And I think that that's more mentally polarized. If that makes sense, Joshua.
Yeah, it does.
So Mathew Roberts was definitely very important to me, and so was the person that you interviewed for it's on esoteric astrology, Clifford
Oh, Cliff.
Ribaudo.
Yeah, Cliff Ribaudo.
Yeah, he's like he's an amazing dude. Like what he doesn't know, I don't know. So the sort of things that he's come across and that he's read about, like I can say, oh, I read this wild thing on page 546 of the rays and initiations or something like that, and then he can just tell you what it what it means, like it's off the top of his head. I was having all this. I was waking up and feeling all this electricity around my head. I didn't know what on earth it was, and I wrote in the experiencer group about this has just happened. And he messaged me and told me what it was, that it's got to do with when you're sleeping and things like that. And moving into that astral plane, but just most people aren't conscious of that experience. And so I was, oh, okay. So I did an experiment and I reached into, because I could sense it back then. I reached into that electric field, put myself to sleep. Well, then I woke myself up from my sleeping state, did it again. I kept going in and out, just confirming what he had said. But then I guess to try and bring at least the sort of experiential side of it to to its like the end point of what happened. There were two things that happened. One was this really beautiful experience where I was outside, and my daughter came out for some reason, and she started skipping around the garden, really happy. My dogs came out and they started running around. They were really happy, and I was looking at the ground. Everything felt enchanted, is the best I can describe. And I thought, oh, you're going to show something to me, are you? And I looked up, and there was this orange ball, not the same size as the one I described earlier, but just this orange ball just moving across the sky like this towards a cloud. And it's hard to really explain why, but the whole experience just felt unbelievably beautiful, is what it felt like to bring me to tears. And I thought, I'm going to say thank you for that experience. So I went to bed and I started meditating. I had no structure for my meditation back then, but I could meditate for 4 or 5 hours if I wanted to. No problem. I can't do that now, but I could do that then. So I meditated and I imagined that orange ball. Was like trying to pump out so much. Thank you for that amazing experience. And then I was aware of this electric ball coming to me, which I described before from outside myself, which happened fairly regularly and would sometimes, like, I experienced one going into what I would say is my heart chakra, and feeling electricity going to my feet, not to my head. I've experienced that before, and sometimes it wouldn't quite hit in the right spot, but I got to the point where it was entering from the top of my head. So moved from my heart center to the top of my head. By this stage, I reached out with as much sort of love as I could do to grab this thing. That's the best I can describe the experience. Okay. And all of a sudden I felt this energy, this incredible energy in the room. And I started to see golden flames in my eyes. And this golden ball appeared in front of me and split into 3 like golden light beings. But being in their presence was extremely hard to tolerate, is the best I can describe. Not from a fear perspective, but it's just really intense. I don't know, we don't have a word actually for describing what it's like to be in the presence of something like that. And look, I'll tell you what they said. I said, "Who are you?" They said, "We're Divine Light, and we're going to be working with you now." And then I know that, again, I was told I'm here to be a coach of my daughter. I was told that I know I had a huge conversation, but I was only able to take a couple of things back consciously in my mind. I'm not sure what the rest of that discussion was. And the next day, I had one of those distortions in space come next to me. I was taken into it, and I was told explicitly, like you passed the second course, was what I was told. I wasn't really familiar with the different initiations in theosophy at that stage,
I'm just
but now I
imagining
wonder.
yogurt from Spaceballs showing up. You passed the second course.
Yeah,
Now
that's
for
right.
5 easy payments of $10.99, you can move on to the next course.
Yeah, that's right.
Merchandising, where the real money from the movie is made.
So, like, that's what they said. You passed the second course, and I
Well,
kind
it
of think,
sounds like
well,
they had kind
it
of
sounds like second initiation. And
well,
then
they had
after
some sort
that,
of
things started to
program for
wind down.
you. This is just my speculation from what you're saying. It sounds like they had some sort of program for you that they were like, he needs to learn these lessons or get to this state of
Yeah.
consciousness. And according to whatever parameters they had laid out, you've
Mm.
got there.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, Joshua, like in terms of moving you to sort of where you need to be, because part of the story and what makes I guess what the light being said to me makes sense is that during that period of time, as I've said before, my capacity to meditate was well beyond what I'm currently capable of doing. I could meditate for significant periods of time. And when I was meditating, I could hear what I assume people refer to as spirit guides. Like I could hear, if I concentrated in a certain direction, like above my head or to my right or something like that, I could hear different voices talking. And I even had experiences where I saw what those spirit guides look like, which was basically in a silhouette form. So one of them was an animal type spirit guide, like a flying fox. And I saw it fly over the top of myself and my daughter as a silhouette. And I even heard it fly over the top of me. But after the experience with the light beings, those spirit guides that seemed more animal related, they left, and I haven't had any experiences with them again. I can't hear them in meditation, and I haven't seen any of them again. One other thing that that occurred, and a reasonable amount of time actually after the intense experiences that I was describing before finished, was I started to experience something that I came to understand was astral clairvoyance, or is called astral clairvoyance by theosophists anyway. And one of the aspects of that is like, you might be in a dream, for example, while you're asleep, and then let's pretend that dream is about you're in a car crash and you wake up in the middle of the car crash. So you're fully awake, but you still hear and you feel the experience of that dream continuing, so that car crash continuing in subtle substance is really what it feels like. It's an experience of what people call subtle substance. It's extremely, when that starts to happen to you, and I've read that that's quite common with people that are going through this kind of experience, eventually that develops for whatever reason. I presume a certain center opens up. It's just very disruptive. I couldn't find any particular use for it. I'm sure there are symbolic uses for those things, but it's not a pleasant thing to be experiencing. And so I I communicated with somebody, spoke to somebody about what I was going through, and they provided me with this sort of technique, I guess, is what we could call it, and it allowed me to focus on moving energy from my solar plexus up to my head, and after doing that and following that procedure, my understanding is that that closes your solar plexus down and reduces your astral polarization anyway, and helps to make you more mentally polarized. And so once I'd gone through that process of every day, I believe it was at the stage, moving energy up from my solar plexus to my head and out of my head, those experiences did stop, which was really interesting to me because it just further validated for me that, okay, energy centers are real things, subtle substances are real things, and also we have this kind of perception, or at least I did, that what goes on in your head is like, it's not real in a way, like you can sort of play around with things in your mind. But here I'm having an experience where what you're doing in your mind is having literal impact on my daily life in terms of the sorts of energies and subtle substances that I was experiencing. So again, that changed my perspective on discipline with respect to how I use my mind and how I think with my mind, because well, I don't particularly want to have those sorts of experiences again. And clearly doing things in your mind can induce those experiences, or also be used to try and close them down.
Yeah. I know in Theosophy they talk about it. They talk about initiation in a very linear way, and they talk about it in a very discrete way. I suspect it's actually more of a continuum than it is necessarily so discrete. But I think there are maybe particular peak points that you might hit.
Well, I
But
think
so after I had that experience and I was told I'd passed a second course, I stopped having experiences like all the time, and it started to wind down. I didn't have the really high pitched noise that I could hear all the time. That sort of started to decrease for me, and the experiences kind of spread out more. So the most recent experience I had was waking up at like 2 a.m, and I saw a 5-pointed star made of flame moving from east to west, like as I was looking. So not in the sky, but like in front, like just like if you had your eyes closed, like just there. Um, and then it was there long enough for me to be, am I dreaming? No, I'm awake. Like I'm awake. And I was able to analyze it. Yep, it's 5 points. It's oriented with its point up like this. It's got flames within it as well, and slightly licking outside of the edges. It's moving from the east to the west. So it was there for a significant period of time. And then I just lay there with this imprint of this star in my eyes, and then this huge bang happened, like the house was hit with hit with a lightning strike. Um, but those kinds of experiences are not day to day for me now. That's I'm meditating as part of the arcane school now, because I find that useful, and I'm trying to work out what that actual experience really meant. I mean, it could have meant that's it, or I don't know, you're done. But if you read Initiation Human and Solar, it talks about the 5-pointed star and how it relates to initiation. It's mentioned
Well,
a few
to your
times in
point
there.
earlier about initiation being a continuum, I mean, there's sort
Yeah.
of like the 5 initiations they talk about in the book, but the Tibetan talks about how, you know, there's all sorts of minor initiations, you know, even throughout your day. And so
Yeah.
whether or not you experience one of those major or lesser initiations, depending on how you look at it, it was still an initiation of your consciousness into a greater light, a
Yeah.
greater truth, a greater love.
Yeah.
And yeah, and the thing with like whatever these watermarks, wherever they're set,
Yeah.
there's a process of preparing for that, and that all that preparation eventually leads up to attainment of something, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that is continuous for me is like crown chakra stimulation. So I can be, if I'm talking to someone or something's happening, sometimes I'll feel stimulation on my top of my head, um, like asking me to take notice of what's happening at the time. Um, I will still now and then see golden lights. I don't really know what that is. Sometimes it's pixelation of gold in space. Um, but the intense sort of experiences just sort of they wound down. And so now it's more like, you know, there might be something that's quite significant to me at least happen every, you know, 3 months or something like that, let's say. But I, from my perspective now, is like, well, okay, initiation's a useful framework to think about it. Like whether it's a first or second initiations happen, it doesn't really matter. Okay, I've just used those to kind of orient people if they're trying to listen to this and they study theosophy or something like that. That might help them to try and come to terms with some of the things that I've said. I don't think that it really matters what it is, but it does mean that when you've gone through those experiences, you're thinking to yourself, well, okay, there's presumably going to be another one coming up at some point. And I want my permanent atoms to be ready for that in whatever incarnation that happens to be. And so the best way to do that is to live as good a life as you can according to spiritual, you know, guidance, I think. Which is one of the reasons that I'm a classroom teacher now, because I think using theosophical terms, um, my discipleship service is probably to do with, you know, the nurturing of our next generation, which we have a huge teacher shortage at the moment. It's getting really quite desperate. No one wants to do that job. It is a hard job, but needs to be done. And it's one of the few things that I can think of doing where I feel like I'm being true to who I am, which if you're, again, if you're a theosophist, you would probably say, well, that's got to do with what rays are relevant to your, you know, your soul and your personality and things like that. So, yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing all that. I hope people found it useful. And if you did, let us know in the comments, and maybe you have some advice. Maybe you know about some of this stuff and you have some wisdom or insight to impart. We'd love to hear from you on that regard too. But if you enjoyed the video, leave a like on it. Consider subscribing or sharing with somebody who might need to hear this. Do you have anything else to add on this, or?
Um, well, you usually have your question, don't you, or something like that at the end of your
Oh, sure.
interviews?
Well, I guess I'll ask you a question. Why don't you tune into your intuition and see what message you have for the audience? Just take a minute if you need to.
Mm. I think my message really to people would be not to be scared, to be curious, uh, and be as curious as you can be, even if it
Well, it's been a great conversation. I think there's been a lot of great insights, and I really appreciate you sharing the kind of interesting experience. We'll see if anybody reached out in the comments, and maybe somebody else has had some of these elements that have happened to them too. We'll see. And but
Thank
if
you,
anybody
Josh.
out there has had an experience that they'd like to share, reach out to me, and we'll see if maybe we can set up a video similar to this, sharing their experience.
Thanks, Joshua. I really appreciate you giving me this opportunity, and it really is my hope that it might help someone else who finds themselves somehow on a spiritual path from a path of complete denial of anything like that kind of thing, to be able to deal with it, in perhaps an easier way than I had to. So thank you so much,
Yeah.
Joshua,
Well,
for
thanks
that
for
opportunity.
having enough faith in me to come on and share through this venue. Until next
No
time, may
worries.
the force be with everybody, and that's it from Joshua's Magic.
Okay.